views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Coming up on this special edition of Perspectives, we tackle front and center the issue of race relations in America. Our expert and experienced panel will weigh in on offer some solid resolutions from their perspectives. That's coming up on Perspectives with yours truly, Darren Hyman.
What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
What's on your mind? What's on your mind?
Let 'em know. Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective, which shines a light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference.
What's your perspective?
Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective?
And thank you for joining us. And we want to inform you that this is a very special episode of Perspectives set on the heels of the racial tone and discontent around the nation. We want to give you a full hour of concrete discussion right here on our show. We have an excellent panel joining us today. Our first guest is raised in the Bronx, known as a leader for this generation, a preacher, teacher, singer, motivational speaker, and social activist. He's recently been appointed as the National Director of Public Relations for Healing Communities USA, for whom he is also a certified trainer. We welcome now Bishop Darren Ferguson, who's sharing with us. Also joining us is a Black historian in her own right. You've seen her here on Perspectives. Her experience includes being the managing editor of the Million Man March, contributor and researcher of the Family of Black America, co-editor of Black Star Power, BET, celebrating 20 years, and the author of Discovering Black New York. She's definitely no stranger here to our show. We welcome also Linda Tarrant-Reed. We also have Francois Genty. He's the community organizer for the Haitian American Caucus. And lastly, William Council, professionally and affectionately known as Coach Billy. He's the 32-year veteran of the legendary New York City basketball circuit and has devoted the past 17 years of his life to instilling values, morals, and discipline in today's youth throughout the art of basketball. And we thank you all for coming and sharing with us here today. And ladies first, I'm going to go with you, Linda, as we talk. Let's talk about this here, because the first thing we're talking about is the racial tone in America. I think some people say that it hasn't been this bad since the 60s, given the fact that you have a Trump presidency that's running for president. You've got a lot of rhetoric that's going on. And it seems as though America is probably more divided now than ever before.
I agree with you, Darren. Basically, I think it happened when John McCain selected Sarah Palin as his running mate. She seemed to open up, a whole dialogue that had been closed previously. A dialogue that probably took place behind closed doors, but she brought it front and center. She talked about racism, she talked about all kinds of issues that, seem to affect a very specific group of white people. And really, to me, that was the beginning of giving voice to this group and segment of the population that has found comfort and solace in supporting Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. Billy, how would you term and how would you deem the racial tone right now?
Realistically, has it ever changed? Or has social media just really brought it to the forefront? In the early 60s and 50s, we didn't have social media to help us see the light of racial tone, but right now we do. So my question is, has it ever really changed? And I really don't think so.
Bishop Ferguson?
I think that what we're seeing is I agree with both that spoke before me, that Sarah Palin did kind of bring this and make it politically correct within certain circles to say some of these things. I also think that the dialogue hasn't changed. It's just come out in front because of social media. Now you can have people who can hide behind a computer desk and say what they want to say with impunity. But I also think we're seeing an uptick in participation in hate groups like the KKK, and I think that a lot of that started immediately after the first Obama election, and that was a definite pendulum swing as a result of a black man being in the White House. And I still think that this narrative about the uppity Negro still exists. I still think that this narrative about the dangerous, angry black man that's going to exact revenge on the white men, and which is why which is why we see Medea make $30 million and Birth of a Nation only make $8 million, because it's a scary narrative to some Americans, including some who look like us. And I think that we're in a place right now where we're going to see, one way or another, no matter who wins on November 8th, we're going to see some fireworks behind this election, because this is a war of ideologies. This is a war of ideals between Americans who are sheltered and believe that we should go back and make America great again, and the people who think that we should keep moving forward and progressing. And my question to those who want to make America great again is, when has America ever been great for somebody who looks like me?
Francois, let me bring you into this. I guess you are the millennial in the group, and obviously you come with great experience and knowledge. And listen, millennials have a great place in this discussion, and obviously you weren't around per se in the 60s, but yet and still you know about the 60s. What's it like from a millennial perspective of your feeling of the tone in America? What do you get?
I'm getting from my previous knowledge of what was going on in the 60s and what we're experiencing today as of late. For me, it started with the death of Trayvon Martin, and how certain people were able to get away with certain things, and social media played a great role in putting this information in the forefront and in front of people, where people actually had to confront it. And as to where certain things cannot be shadowed and cloaked, everything is out in the open. And I feel like the tone hasn't really changed, but the platforms to bring the conversation and forge the conversation has changed.
Linda, this has been something that's gone on historically, obviously, and Bishop Ferguson alluded to it.
Right.
When has it ever been any different? And give us some historical context.
I think it's important to remember that history repeats itself, and in the 50s, the murder of Emmett Till was an enormous, horrible incident that affected not only the black community, but the nation. And the fact that Emmett Till was a young man from Chicago who went down south to visit his relatives, and because of some behavior, as you know, they say, and we don't even know for a fact what exactly happened, but he was murdered. And they found his body, and they found the people that murdered him. They brought those people to justice, but they were not convicted. And Emmett Till's mother made the most amazing decision to allow his body to be photographed, and it was put in Jet magazine. And I remember that. I mean, that was our social media. That was an event that is seared in the minds of young black people, middle-aged black people now, my age group, your age group. Mm-hmm. And we remember that. When Barack Obama was elected the first African-American president, certainly we did feel that we had accomplished a lot of what we had put forth in the civil rights movement. Many people called it an era of post-racial era, which was not true. Really, it was the beginning of ripping the scab off of the racism that has been simmering below the surface in this country, probably since the 60s and beyond.
Mm-hmm. And so let me get in here and ask a question. She talks about Jet Magazine, right? Listen, take us back, take me back to Jet Magazine. But that was actually social media back in the day for us. That was the media that we had. Now with the emergence of social media, you see an Alton Sterling, you see Philandro Castile, you see these Trayvon Martin, you see Eric Garner. Yeah. You have actual people that you actually see front and center, real lifetime killings of African American men. What's the conversation that you have talking with some of these younger men and those in the community after incidents such as this? Because there is this buildup that comes within our community of, I've seen it again, I felt it again. How many times is this going to happen?
Well, It's systematic. You know, when you really look at it from, you know, a retro perspective, you know, like Miss Linda said, when you're talking about Emmett Till, you know, it's the same scenario. It's the same scenario, you know, we're being killed by, you know, our own that's supposed to protect us, our police officers, right? So our police officers, we become afraid of them, right? So now the conversations that you have with these young men is how do you deal with your police officers in your community? You know, and I think it becomes to the point where we have to understand, you know, what are we doing? You know, what are we doing to aid the situation? Maybe nothing, but what are we doing to stop it? And that's the same thing, nothing. So it's like we protest, but then what happens after the protest? Nothing. So it sometimes just takes us back to the point where what are we going to do differently? How are we going to make the changes? And what are we going to do? What are we going to teach our kids to say when the police pull us over? What are we going to say when, you know, we're faced with those guns in our face? You know, people say, oh, you know, you need to say yes, sir, and no, sir. But how about if you don't say anything and you still a target? So again, where does it come from? It comes from systematic.
Bishop Darren Ferguson, let me ask you a question about talking to perhaps congregations, because you have a congregation. You have a congregation that is multi-generational, right? And you got seniors in your congregation as well as, and I know you've had history with the hip-hop church. You've got the hip-hop generation that's in your church as well. How do you bridge the gap and have those conversations with those persons when you're talking about the issue of race, racism, police relations, police brutality? Because once again, you know, you've got all these generations and all have experienced the same thing. What's the message that you give people today?
Well, it's simple. And also, in addition to all that, I'm also working at LaGuardia Community College, so I'm talking to college students every day as well. And I think what we have to do is give both a historical perspective and a perspective about policy change. So the historical perspective is this: the narrative that was created after the Emancipation Proclamation of the angry black man exacting revenge on his oppressors, right? Which Nat Turner, all the way down. And also the history of police precincts, where they came from. The original precincts were places where they made sure that slaves didn't run away. So the root of a thing determines the fruit of a thing. So what we're seeing is the fruit of this poisonous tree that was planted right after the Emancipation Proclamation. And I think you teach this historical perspective, and then you say that because there is this dangerous root that has produced this poisonous fruit, that we have to start talking about policy change at the root. And the policy change is simply this. And let me just say this from the perspective, I am the son of a police officer, right? My dad was a police officer. So I understand policing from a couple of perspectives, and somebody who's formerly incarcerated, right? But we have to start saying that we have to fundamentally change some of the policies that our police use. Number one amongst those is that there will never be a police officer convicted of murder even when he's wrong in a case like a Sean Bell, until we change the law that's on the books that says that a police officer can use deadly force when they feel threatened. And there's no real litmus test for that. There's no real way to determine that. So an officer could say, oh, well, he was running at me and he was big and he was black, so I felt in danger, so I killed him. And until we get to that, until we start talking about those policies and talking about the fundamental way that we police our communities, there's not going to be any change.
We're going to come back after the break, and after we come back, we're going to talk to our expert panel about how exactly do we improve race relations. I mean, a lot of racial tension still continues to exist. We want things to become better. How do they become better? Our panel will discuss that when we return right after this.
Morning, Gary. We are GetSchooled.com. You want a college education, don't you? Gary, financial aid forms. Biology homework, G. What? Picking a college, man. You and us go together like tacos and Tuesday.
And I love tacos.
Don't wait. Communicate. Make your emergency plan today.
Being prepared is a part of who you are, but it's especially important in the case of a disaster. Be informed about possible emergencies in your area. Make a plan that covers where you go in an emergency. Build a kit with the things you need to survive. There's no one more capable of planning for your situation than you. Start your plan today. Go to ready.gov/myplan.
I'm David Lesh, legal correspondent to the Morning Show Open. If you have a legal question that you'd like me to answer, please send me an email at davidlesh@bronxnet.org, and I will address it on our Ask Your Lawyer segment.
If you want to stay in the know about the latest happenings en español, check out Diálogo Abierto, BronxNet's own Spanish show, Wednesdays, 6:30 p.m. on Channel 67. The latest in news, arts, culture, politics, and what's going on in your neighborhood. Diálogo Abierto, the best way to stay connected in Spanish. See you there. Te esperamos.
Continuing our conversation with our expert panel on this very special edition of Perspectives. If you don't know, we're giving an hour talking about race relations in America, giving you a little bit of historical context and sharing a little bit about what's going on. Listen, I didn't get to Francois early on, and I want to talk to you about this as we start this segment off. Improving race relations. I think, Bishop Ferguson leads to a very important piece where it talks about law enforcement.
Right.
You have to change policy. It's one thing to protest, but you have to change policy. But what are some of the other things that you can do? Because from a millennial's perspective, right, this can be done because we see a lot of millennials who are really, interracial and they work well together, and they're doing a better job in some cases than some real grown adults. What are we missing? Take your props, man. Take your props.
Thank you. But what I would say is, I would say education is a strong key factor in that, because to understand the position of an officer, and to understand my position as a black man, as a young black man, whether I'm in the Upper East Side or East Flatbush in Brooklyn, I need to know how I'm viewed. And my father is also a bishop, and he early on explained to me what my role was in society as a black man, that I'm viewed differently by the police. And even just to give a little a story, when I was living in Jamaica Estates, when I was going to high school at Martin Van Buren High School in Queens, I was running for the bus because I was late for work, and I got stopped because I was a black man in a Jewish neighborhood running for the bus. The cops pulled me over, took everything out my pockets, and they made me lay down on the floor because they thought I just robbed the house. With no call, there was no call, no report, because I was a young black man with braids running down the block. And this is, because I understood how I was viewed, I understood how to react. And fortunately, I wasn't one of the many people who lost their lives in that situation. So it really boils down to education and how to understand that you're viewed as an individual to this law enforcement that we're dealing with.
What conversation do you have? I know you're ready. Go.
You know what? I agree with him, and then I also don't agree with him. Because education, of course, is pivotal and is important. But the police officers, they don't see an educated black man. They see a black man. The educated part is taken off. So you can look at all the people who were ever stopped, right? What the media does and what the police thing, what they do when they murdered, they first bring out their criminal history to diminish their character. Right? So when you look at that, you have to say to each and every black man that you have a conversation with, why are they stopping me? And the first thing that they're going to say, they're stopping me because I'm black. Right? So what happens when you are an educated black man? Does that change? Does that content even change? Is it even thought about? That you're an educated professor, doctor, a lawyer? Does it? No, it doesn't. So I think what we have to do is realize where it comes from. And that's when the laws have to change. That's when we have to sit there and say, you know what, I am not going to be a victim of this anymore. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to do something about it. And we have to really stand up, take a stand, and protest, and then have a follow-up of the protest.
Bishop Ferguson,
I was going to say I agree with you. My son just recently traveled down south. He was driving a car down south, and even though he's 36 years old, as a parent, as a mother of a black male driving in the South, I mean, I was petrified, especially now. And so clearly, my husband and I have had the conversation with our son since he was probably 12 years old, that there are certain things that you have to do, you know, if you're stopped. And everybody has had that talk. All black parents have had that talk with their black sons on how to behave so that they don't become victims. And so how do I see this changing? A lot of times I think it's, of course, they don't see us and they don't see our gentlemen because they're black, because they see the color of their skin first. In our community, which is New Rochelle, they're starting an initiative with the young males, which is, you know, community policing, so that the young males in the community and the police that police the community are getting to know the young adults. And they're doing all kinds of activities. They're teaching them all kinds of things. It's a program that was started with My Brother's Keeper, which is an initiative that President Obama has supported and, you know, is behind. So organizations like My Brother's Keeper, which is nationwide, needs to figure out how to build in to their organization and to their programming ways to really help this issue.
And Bishop, we're going to talk to you about improving the criminal justice system. I mean, obviously, while you're talking about that on one side, the criminal justice system, of course, needs massive reform, and we've heard both presidential candidates, well, at least on the Democratic side, talk about really addressing criminal justice reform, the fact that you can spend more time for crack cocaine, and you've got more people utilizing, you know, more people utilizing crack, I should say, or going to jail for crack, as opposed to those who are using cocaine, and we know that more people are using cocaine. You've got the whole unjust sentencing laws. Talk about that and really the push and what's being done behind the scenes, because there's a lot of work that is being done to really address this.
Yes. You know, one of the things that I've taken to saying lately is that sentiment drives policy, right? So people vote the way they feel. So one of the things we have to really address in terms of the criminal justice system, in terms of the unjust way that black men are sentenced and policed, and black women as well, because I'm the father of a 27-year-old black woman who's 6 feet tall and has blonde hair and can be victimized just as quickly as a man could. We have to change some narratives that change some sentiment. One of the narratives that we have to change is black on black crime. Right. I don't like people using that terminology around me. Do we need to stop killing each other? Yes. But you have to realize the black on black crime rate is around 83%. But the white on white crime rate is around 75%. So there's not a real huge difference. So basically people commit crimes amongst the people they live amongst. So if you live amongst black people, crimes are gonna be committed on black people, and vice versa, white on white, Chinese on Chinese, Asian on Asian, whatever it is. So we have to change that. The other sentiment we have to change is the talking about black fathers not taking care of their kids, and that's what leads them to prison. Right. So that's also kind of not really true, because I'm also on the board for Fatherhood Incorporated. And one of the things that we've learned is that black fathers who are not in relationship with the parent of their child are involved in their children's lives in a much higher rate than their other counterparts of white or Latino. So some of the narratives have to change the sentiment, and then we can start talking about changing the policy once people feel differently.
Absolutely, change the narrative. We'll be right back. Listen, we're going to continue with this discussion. Just got to take a quick break. We'll be right back right after this.
Hey, look, it's those guys.
What's up? What's happening today? Let's go, Pearly Whites, man. Yeah. Boys, check it out.
Ooh, cute.
Are you good to try?
I'm fine. Hey girl, what's up? What's the name? What's good? What's up?
What's happening? How many did you have?
I should be fine.
You should be?
Sir, go and step out of the vehicle for me.
Yes, sir. See ya, buddy. Today, Sean's got a hearing. We'll see how it goes. Good luck. So turns out, buzz driving and drunk driving, they're the same thing, and it costs around $10,000. So not worth it.
Back here on Perspectives, and we're in our final segment, so I want to give a chance to everybody to, pretty much wrap up and get some closing thoughts. What do you think that we'll see come the end of this presidential election?
One of the things I think we're going to see sort of the same. I think, both candidates have, one candidate, let me just rephrase that, has good ideas and the other one has idiotic ideas. But one of them speaks the truth on how white America feel about us.
I think that we're going to see some change because if Hillary Clinton becomes the president, she has adopted a lot of Bernie Sanders' platform. And Elizabeth Warren, who is also a very progressive person, is very active in Hillary's campaign. And lest we forget, Hillary is going to be the first female president in the history of the United States. So with that comes a certain amount of, I don't even know the word because it's never happened before, but there are going to be things that she's going to do that are going to help a large segment of the population. That's what I believe.
I believe that if Hillary becomes president, I think that I'm afraid that some of the policies that she's presenting, she won't follow through with them, as we've seen in the past with other presidential candidates. So that's one of the things that I'm very leery about with Hillary.
I think we're going to see what has to happen, no matter who becomes president. And I'm hoping it's not the orange person, because orange is not the new black. But what I'm hoping is that this dialogue continues, this national dialogue across the aisle amongst people who understands that the criminal justice system and the systems of race relations that we have in this country are no longer sustainable. So we have to do something different.
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming to share on this first half hour of Perspectives. This is a part of a two-part series, so I want you to know all four of them and myself. We'll be back for part two, tuning in next week as we continue on this very special topic. It's worth an hour. It needs to be an hour. You just can't get it through in a half an hour. And unfortunately, as you can tell just right now, our first half hour is up. So I do want to thank you for watching Perspectives. Stay tuned to Perspectives on our next week, and we will pick up the conversation where we left off, talking about the racial tone in America, what needs to be done to improve it, and really just putting a flashlight on it and having some discussion. For all of us here on the Set of Perspectives, I'm Darren Jaime saying thank you for watching. Until the next time we meet, stay safe, share a perspective with somebody else. It just might make a difference in somebody else's life.
What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
What's on your mind? What's on your mind?
Let 'em know. Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a...
Bronx Backyard on BronxNet. From Broadway in the Bronx. On BronxNet Channel 67 Optimum, 33 Fios, and at www.bronxnet.tv. Featuring Johnny Grave, Johnny 7, Brooks Thomas, Genetic Control, Ryan Banga. Bronx Backyard on Bronx Live on your channels, BronxNet.